This is the fourth town hall that we're doing. So either people are tired of hearing me talk about this stuff, because we've had about 100 people at the other ones, or they love the great weather, or they think we've got it dialed in and they don't really care about the budget. I'm not sure which one that is, but that's, but we'll start with the most positive outlook on that one. All right. But thank you guys, everybody, for being here. I super appreciate it. We do a lot of work here at the clubhouse and throughout the park to keep everything running well. We're going to talk about some of those things tonight. But I am blessed tonight to have my oldest daughter visiting, daughter Laurel. Laurel is visiting from UC San Diego, where she's finishing up her master's degree in education. And so that's just my way to kiss up to Becky, the board president, who also was a teacher. Didn't work. All right. Didn't work. But I'm super blessed to have my daughter here with us this evening. We were, since we're in the middle of budget time, we weren't going to get to spend a whole lot of time together. So she's in the middle of a huge test that she's doing, but she drove up to hang out with me for about 30 minutes in between finishing up the presentations and getting the dinner ready and her working on her stuff. But I'm really blessed to have a daughter like that one sitting right there. So thank you, Laurel. All right, I know that's not what you guys came to hear about, so let's get on with the budget stuff, right? Okay, tonight we're going to talk about smart budgets. It's going to pick up kind of in theme from what we've been doing the last couple town halls. All right, you remember 2 town halls ago in January, we talked about, what did we talk about? We talked about comparing our association to 3 other associations that were very similar to ours. Okay, we looked at the demographics. They were founded at the same time. They had roughly the same price housing. They had roughly the same financial household income. They had the same types of amenities. And so we compared that and we looked at what their budgets were like compared to ours so that we could benchmark against them to say, hey, are we spending too much money? Are we, don't say this out loud, spending too little money on some things? But how do we compare? It gave us a good benchmark. And what came out of that were 2 things. 2 big messages came out of that. Number one, when we looked at our association compared to these others like ours, we found that we were very, very different in how much money we put into maintenance in the park in terms of dollars per month per house. Okay? It was a factor. I mean, I put that slide here at the end, for us to reference as we go through it. So we'll come back to that at the end. But that was one of the key differences. The other key difference was how severely underfunded we are in our reserves compared to the other 3 associations, who were very, very similar in how they funded the maintenance and how they funded their reserves. So we'll touch back on that again too. So those were the 2 key things that came out of that comparison and helped form the foundation of the Fix Our Stuff plan, which we followed up on when we talked about reserves last month. Okay? So clearly we have some catch-up work to do. I mean, we can drive around and see that we've got a lot of deferred maintenance. A lot of reasons for that. There's absolutely is no finger pointing on my part, no blame at all. There are, reasons people made the decisions they did at the time, and we are where we are. So what are we going to do about it now? All right? So the Fix Our Stuff plan kind of gave you the broad outline of that, and now we've been drilling down into the specific budget, over the last month to how to put that together to kind of balance all the different moving pieces that we have going on. All right? Does that make sense? Okay. So before I get going on the details, I just wanted to talk about budgets for just a second in terms of what I'm looking for as we prepare the budget. What do we want it to accomplish for us? How do we know if it's a good budget or a bad budget? How do we know if it's a realistic budget or a pie-in-the-sky budget? Okay? The first thing is we want our budgets to be a roadmap for the future. Okay? The budget should always predict the future and give us a plan for what's coming down the road so that we don't have surprises, or we at least minimize the surprises or are prepared for them. All right? Budgets are accurate, but they're not necessarily precise. Okay? And what I mean by that is they should be based on accurate information from history, looking back, but they can't predict the future precisely. There are always going to be changes and variations, and that's something, that we, that we have to be prepared for. Budgets should be conservative, not optimistic. All right? I mean, I love our town halls to be optimistic and talk about all of the things that we can do. I'm excited about that. There are really some great things we can do. But, when we do our budget, you got to think about anticipating lower revenue and higher expense. If you're going to make a mistake, which side of the fence do you want to make the mistake on? You want to make the mistake on the side that doesn't have as bad a consequence. Right? So if you overestimate your revenue, it's going to put you in a bad spot at the end of the year. Right? If you underestimate your expenses, that's going to put you in a bad spot at the end of the year. So one of the strategies is we want to be conservative, but not optimistic when we come up with estimates and budgets for those things. All right? The budget also, though, has to be flexible. Because as much as we want to predict the future, as much as we'd like to narrow it down precisely, and in some things we can pencil in really close what it's going to be. It's very predictable. But in a lot of cases, we're going to have surprises as we go through the year. So we have to be prepared for that. They happen. Sometimes our priorities change. Okay, something new comes up. Maybe there's a big newscast and a bunch of media attention that goes on ADA stuff. Well, maybe we want to reprioritize our ADA stuff because of what's going on around us. So that can happen. Now, sometimes we discover opportunities, or we have somebody that we just have something that we didn't think about or anticipate ahead of time, but it's just something that we jump on now. Maybe there's a great big sale on pipe, for example, for the OSS project, and we can get 50% off, right? We'd love to have the money to be available to do that because that makes smart sense. And then we always have to keep in mind to plan for imperfection, okay? There are going to be mistakes. The budget is not the Bible. It's not making that as a religious comment, but it is not inviolate, okay? The budget is a guide. It's a guide to get us through the year with accomplishing the goals we set out to accomplish and having enough money at the end of the year to pay all those bills and continue into the next year. Okay? And one last thing that people don't often think about with budgets or designing them or financial statements is we want our budget to be informative of deviations. Okay? And what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is if we are going off the tracks or if things are not going the way we predicted or the way we budgeted, we want to be able to identify that as soon as possible because that gives us the most time to take corrective actions, to change and adapt our plans. So we want there to be kind of flags along the way that sometimes they're red flags, sometimes they're white flags, or sometimes they're green flags. But we want to be aware for those and watching that as we go throughout the year. For those of you that come to the board meetings or see our postings online from the board meetings, you'll see the forecast that I do. Right? And the forecast is a natural extension of the budgeting process where essentially every month I update our budget for the rest of the year based on what's already happened in this year and the better knowledge we have about what's coming next. Okay? But the better signposts we can get in our budget, or in our financial statements that alert us to things that we should pay attention to, the better financial tool that is for us. All right, make sense? Okay, so I'm going to give you an example. Okay, we're going to talk about the pool for a minute. And we talked about the pool a couple times. I've talked with many of you guys about a recommendation for making a change there in terms of being able to spend less money and keep the pool open more hours. All right? I'm going to extend that example tonight. Okay, I'm going to show you what the projections are if we don't make a change to how we do the pool. Right? This is about predicting the future. Right? And this has to do with the fact that minimum wage, right, is in the middle of a 50% increase. All right? Now, some departments that affects a lot more than others, but the pool is all staffed with minimum wage employees. All right? So that means over that 5-year period of time, to do the same labor costs and the same thing we've been doing, those labor costs over 5 years are going to go up 50%. So here's an example. The first column shows you the 2017 actuals for what happened with the pool. All right? We did $24,000 in revenue. We did $5,300 in cost of goods sold. That's for the stuff we sell to Snack Shack. We spent $57,000 on labor, and we had I can't even read it, $25,000 roughly in expenses. So for a total cost of $64,500. Okay? Our 2018 budget, okay, budgeted $23,000 in revenue, $5,000 for cost of goods sold, $66,000 in labor, right? You see that big jump there? And $28,000 in expenses. So now the operating cost for the pool went from $64,000 to $75,000. Okay? In 2019, if we continued this same practice, right, we can expect revenue to go up. I made the assumption revenue is going to go up about 5%. Cost of goods sold goes up about 3%. Those are fairly tame predictions. But labor cost is going up about an average of 8% over this time, which means it pushes our labor for keeping the pool operating the exact same way up to $71,000. Okay, and then your expenses go up a little bit, a couple percentage points. But now all of a sudden, it costs us $80,000 to operate the pool this year if we just keep doing what we were doing. Continue that out to 2022, and all of a sudden, it's now costing us $97,000 or almost $100,000 a year to operate the pool. Okay? So, those are the kinds of things where we want a good budget and a good plan to help us identify those ahead of time so that we can explore alternatives. Now, whether we take that alternative path or not, that depends on what the community wants to do and what the board decides. I get to make recommendations, but I get to blame the board for all my bad decisions. But we want to identify those things, because the sooner we identify them, the sooner we can make a change or take corrective action. Right? If we aren't paying attention to that, we just keep going along like we have always, we're going to be halfway through that and all of a sudden going, well, why is it costing so much more to operate the pool? Well, I mean, this one's fairly predictable. It's not complicated. But if you compare that to the alternative example that's down below, you look at the same thing, the 2017 actuals, the 2018 budget, okay, and then the 2019 forecast, which is what I've prepared based on changing the pool from having lifeguards to not having lifeguards, because that's our biggest expense. And the expense is going to go up a lot this year compared to last year. And then that would be installing automatic gates, leaving the pool open more hours, say from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. at night, being able to extend the season for the hot tub. So I've even factored in, extra propane for heating the hot tub outside the current season. And if you do that, you can project that we're looking at about $46,000 to operate the pool. All right, I said we'd look at a savings of about $40,000. It's not quite that much by the time I factored in the extra cost for propane to keep the pool open longer. But we're actually getting something in exchange for that, right? So that's a difference of $34,000 just in 1 year, right? If you continue that same thing out till you get to 2022, you'll find that we're not bringing in nearly as much revenue, right, as we were before, because we're not doing swimming lessons, we're not doing swim classes, we're not doing all the things we were doing. We're not charging guest fees. We're just letting people bring in their guests with the pass they have. So we bring in a lot less revenue. But even with that, our labor still only goes up to about $21,000 at that same price increase, that same rate increase. And our cost of goods and our expenses total, go up proportionally. So in that year, we actually would save about $44,000 from the alternative. Right? So over the course of that next 4 years, it would be about $160,000 cheaper to operate the pool this way than it would be to keep doing what we're doing. Now, does that mean we have to do that? No, absolutely not. It just is good information on which to make a recommendation, Because I can tell you what, when we look at the rest of the stuff going on, we got an awful lot of other things we could do with that other $160,000. Not to mention that we get to keep the pool open longer, right? So, the reason I want to spend time going through this is because I've been digging deeply into our financial statements, going through the way we keep track of things and how we organize things, and there's not anything inherently wrong with what we've done. In fact, overall, our budgets have been pretty accurate. We finished the year pretty close to what the budget predicted we were going to finish. Okay? However, if you look historically, we tend to be over on what we estimate labor will cost us, and we tend to be under on what we estimate expenses will cost us. Okay? They tend to average out, and they kind of work out okay. All right? But when we're trying to sharpen our pencil and tighten all of those things up, we've got to get a little bit more precise about those things. I'm going to give you an example, too, of interest and doubtful accounts. Okay? Because this is something that's been creeping up on us over the last couple of years. So I'm showing you here the last 3 years plus the current year's budget, right? What we're forecasting in this budget. So you look at annual assessments. They've gone up a little bit every year. That's great. That's revenues. The aerobic fee, it actually was flat. That one got booked in a different month at that time, so it was on the prior year. But it's been fairly flat. Been exactly flat. But then you look at the interest charges, right? If you just quickly look at this financial statement, you go, wow, interest, $33,000. Hey, that's good, right? We're getting more revenue. And hey, it was better in 2016 because we got $48,000 of interest. And even better in 2017, we got $61,000. And even better in 2018 because we're projecting between interest charges and late charges, we're going to bring in $87,000. Well, what do you think's causing that number and that interest to go up in our projection? It's previous year's unpaid dues. So what do you think the chances are that we're going to actually collect all of the money that we're showing here in our budget? Yeah, it's not quite zero, Gene, but it's not particularly great. Okay? Now, it's over the longer term, we have a good chance of collect it because we have a very strong hold on property. If you're a homeowner, one of the documents you signed, and don't anybody throw anything at me yet, but is if you don't pay your dues, we can file a lien on your house to ensure that the dues get paid to the association. That's one of the promises we made to all the other homeowners that live in this community with us, that we would pay our share of the dues. Yes, sir. Well, we actually have the right because the state of California understands homeowners associations depend on dues as their primary source of income. If we don't get paid by enough people, we can't operate. So we actually can do the process called a non-judicial foreclosure, which means it is just filing paperwork. As long as you file all your paperwork correctly, that process takes anywhere from 6 to 10 to 12 months to do it because you got to follow a very particular structure. Just a second. You got to follow a very particular structure, and then when you do that, you can foreclose on the property and take ownership of it, or take possession of it. You then can either sell it, or you can rent it. Now, a lot of times there's a first mortgage holder on it, and in the past, a lot of times it didn't make sense to do that because the house wasn't worth what it was to. But we don't have to pay off the note. Okay, we can foreclose and take possession of the property without paying off the note. So one revenue opportunity is actually rentals. The owner, the homeowner is liable for the note. They are still liable for the note. However, we would have to notify the first mortgage holder who has a preferred lien to us in that situation. But the good news is, how much are dues compared to what the mortgage is? Pretty dang small, or it should be, right? Because we can start this process as soon as somebody owes $1,800. All right? So it's a pretty powerful, I mean, it costs us money to do it, and it takes time to do it, but it's a pretty powerful, no, it's not even a carrot, it's kind of a hammer. Right? And in many cases, you'd even be able to negotiate with the bank, right? Because the bank doesn't want you messing around with having liens on it and filing foreclosure. And because if they stay current on their first mortgage, the bank doesn't know there's anything wrong. And we're already down the road doing our thing, and we take possession of the house. The first note's still there. The mortgage holder could foreclose on us because they have the right to secure their property. But that's going to take, you guys know how long it takes for a loan company to do that. It takes a lot longer. So we'd have the use of the property for that period of time. Okay? Just, I got another question over here first, Gene. Yeah.
I'm wondering if you have moved forward with any of this type of process with the people that are behind already?
Yes, we have. What we've been doing in the last couple months is we have been going to check to verify that all of the people on title are still the current people on title. We had a couple people from our office go down into the county of Madera to process through all those records. We identified about $80,000 that is truly bad debt. It is uncollectible. The houses have been foreclosed on. There's no chance of getting our money back. But that's actually a surprisingly small part of the whole pot. All right? So the thing that hurts us the most is not getting the money in this year when we're counting on it for the budget. That's what hurts us the most, because then we don't have the cash. When the house sells eventually, before it transfers, we get our money. Right? So over time, there is a good chance that we will collect a good chunk of it. We've had several this year pay off, in fact, and we've collected back dues of $7,000 to $12,000 in a handful of those instances. All right? So it doesn't mean the money's lost forever, but the problem occurs when we leave it sitting on our main financial books, because we get a runaway. It's not a linear function. It's a logarithmic function, right? It's a compound interest. So, because we're charging interest on top of interest on top of interest for the multiple years that these things are past due, right? And that looks to us, when we just glance at the financial statement, if we're not really digging into it, it looks like a good thing. It looks like it's going up. But in point of fact, it's a bad thing in two ways. Number one is we're depending, we don't want that sitting there on our books collecting interest while we're not actually collecting our dues, number one. Number two, we look at that and we tend to count on that as income available for our operations. But guess what? Those are the kind of things where we're not going to balance at the end of the year, because we made a good prediction. We actually put it on our books correctly, but we never get the cash for it. And if we don't get the cash for it, we can't spend it on the things and the expenses that we have. This is part of the reason why, but I got this question at the last town hall, why do we put things in our CapEx budget and then not be able to do them, right? This is part of that reason, because we fully expect to have the money, but by the time we get to the end of the year, we find out we didn't collect what we thought we were going to collect. All right? There's another piece that goes along with this, okay? And that is that no business, well, you guys should probably come up with an example. I can't think of one right now. But virtually no business collects 100% of their invoices. All right? In our industry, in HOAs, like ours, it's about 95%. Okay? That's the number that Layton used for you guys before. That's the same number that Bear Valley Springs puts into their budget when they calculate dues. They assume that 5% of people, 5% of homes are not going to pay their dues in the current year. Okay? So, what happens, okay, and Layton caught this, and we put this in the budget this year. It wasn't super politically correct, so it's not called allowance for doubtful accounts, it's called contingency. But we made a provision of 5% in our budget this year for those dollars we weren't going to collect. So that helps us close the gap as long as it's not more than 5%. It doesn't help us with the interest part. We're still going to be short on the interest part, okay? But it does help us with the dues part. So typically what you would do to be totally transparent about this is you would put on your revenue statement, on your income statement, right below the part where you're showing assessments, you would put a line called allowance for doubtful accounts. And you would plan on not collecting 5%. And if you did collect more than that, great, let's have a party. But if you didn't, you'd have some contingency funds to make up the difference. But you're looking at this, you're watching this all year long. So you don't get to the end of the year and run out of money. That's a challenging thing about an association like ours with cash flow, is we get 50 to 60% of our dues in at the beginning of the year and everything seems great, right? And remember what I told you before about the budgets, which at the end of the year dial out, right? But we have seasonality and things. It's very hard. It actually is very hard to predict where you're going to end up the year when you're just partway through the year, right? So I put a total here to give you guys an example of what is the revenue out of what's posted there. What's the revenue that we're not likely to receive? It's just a rough estimate. Okay, about $156,000 in 2015, about $167,000 in 2016, about $174,000 in 2017, and about $186,000 out of the current 2018 budget. All right, because dues went up, so the amount of money from dues you're not going to get goes up, and interest keeps going up. Okay? So, just a quick point on, I believe this is the best way to do it, because I think this is totally transparent. And I think we need to be honest about what we're collecting, what we expect to collect, and then you can measure our performance on how we do, right? And people get upset, well, homeowners aren't paying, and that's not fair. You're right, it's not. It's totally not fair. But at least everybody knows about it, and we keep that front and center so that we, number one, don't budget and spend the money or have people thinking we have money that we don't have. And number two, we stay on top of it and we be transparent. Now, it's interesting what Bear Valley Springs does with this, okay? What Bear Valley Springs does is they assume 5% of people aren't going to pay, right? And they have like 3,500 homes, but just for the math, assume they have 2,000 homes. So what they do is say, 5% of people aren't going to pay. We only have 1,900 people pay. So instead of, they figure out how much money they need to operate and fund their budget, and then they divide by 1,900 instead of by 2,000. Now, they reasonably expect to collect 100% of that. However, what they've done is they've spread out in advance all the non-payers on the payers. Does that make sense? It's kind of sneaky. I mean, it's maybe politically more feasible. I don't think we should do it that way. I would much rather have us just be straight up about it and know what we're dealing with. But we've got a plan for this so that we can fill that hole. Because there's a hole, particularly in the interest piece, that we're not collecting it, even though it's on our income statement as revenue. All right? So my recommendation for that is we should move all of our doubtful accounts, the ones that hit that $1,800 mark, we should move them into a dedicated accounting system. It doesn't have to be different than our current system, but its own separate set of books for collections, which we will do ourselves, okay? But when it's over in collections, we continue to charge interest on it, and we should, because we'd have the right to collect that when we ultimately get to do recovery. They still owe it to us, but it doesn't mess up our operational books. It doesn't make it messy and have things that, why are we getting paid for that? Where's that interest coming from? It creates a lot more certainty in our primary financial statement, while allowing us to keep detailed track of what's still due in collections. And I'll tell you right now, it's kind of hard with the way the system we have. Yes, sir.
This is a good idea, and it works only if you are strict in the operation of continuing to
Yep.
collect for the accounts. Because once you relapse, then it all goes to pot.
Yep.
So when we bought our property here a year ago, we looked on the financials and we had several $100,000 in arrears.
Right.
To do past boards you never collected, so
Right.
that's the past.
Yep.
My concern is this board, and are you as the manager going to have the fortitude to hold the line and just forget the people crying about they can't pay their dues? You're going to follow the procedure to file the lien and
Yep.
continue the collection.
Absolutely. I've already had those conversations with the board. We've had these discussions. In fact, it's in our bylaws. We're supposed to follow this particular process. So the other part about it, though, is by doing it the way I'm describing, again, it keeps it front and center. So it's not something you don't have to come to the board meeting to find out what the status is. We'll include the status of that with the manager's report that goes posted up on the website every week. But we'll keep that track separately, which right now we actually don't have a system for tracking that. It's an Excel spreadsheet that we have, which is part of the reason it gets out of sync. We need a different system. But when we get that in place, we will hold ourselves accountable to the community, and you hold us accountable to that, because we all want to collect that money. Yeah.
I'm going to paraphrase what I understood you to say. So basically what you're talking about is setting up a separate, having the books for the amount of collection.
Yes.
But that money is not going to be utilized to figure the budget.
Correct.
So in essence, when you do collect, this will be like found money.
Yes.
That you could use to offset any deficits that you have.
Yes. What you do is you put the offset. You have this allowance for doubtful accounts, right? And when you move something to collections, you have an account that says you put this in collections. You then have another line right underneath it that says recovery. That's the money you get back. And when you get the money back, it comes back into the organization, right, to help fund our budget, hopefully have a surplus, hopefully fund operations and all the rest.
So if hypothetically you do collect that money, so how's that going to be allocated? I mean, that's basically what you would be doing, is figuring out, well, we've got, hypothetically, $100,000 and we allocate it here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, in cooperation with the board.
Is that going to be determined by the board, or you're
Yeah.
going to do that determination?
It's in cooperation with the board. Yeah, because they will present financial statements of what there is, and again, we're not quite there yet, but we'll give you cash flow projections of what we've got, what we're going to have, and we'll know if that's found money can let us do some of those other things we want to get done. Yes, sir.
Okay, assuming you have a budget that is going to account for a 5% delinquency,
Yep.
and assuming that everything goes as planned, and you don't have any
Which it never does exactly, but right.
anticipated expenses, but thankfully, you collect some of these delinquent accounts. Now you have this extra money. Would you be inclined to put that into reserves to help fund your reserves? Or would you put that into your operating budget? Where
Yeah.
might you be inclined, philosophically, where might
Yeah.
you be inclined?
The first place you would put it in the current year is in your operations. Because, be honest with you guys, we'll talk about this in a little bit, we have almost no operational reserves. We run really, really close, okay? And that creates a lot of stress and it actually creates unnecessary expense. We don't need to run that close if we stay on top of it. But then when you get to the end of the year, if you have a surplus, we'll take that to the board and say, what should we do with that? We want to invest it in, we could put it to fund reserves. We could put it to, leave it in operational reserves as contingency. We could put it, there's often another reserve fund for new acquisitions, right? For new amenities, right? So if you wanted to build a fancy dog park, right? It could be, and ultimately the board, right? The board makes that determination of where they want that money to get allocated. But first place it would go is for operations. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have an idea of how much money is hanging out there, of people in arrears?
Yes. That's our AR balance right now is a touch over $700,000. Okay, a good chunk of that is interest, right? Interest on top of interest on top of interest. In October, we wrote off $80,000 because it was true bad debt, right? And that's another tricky thing about financial statements, guys. If you write off a bad debt in the year it occurred, that's an expense. That goes against your operating budget. If you write off a bad debt against prior years, that actually should just stay on your balance sheet. It actually shouldn't even show up as an expense on your income statement because it was money you already put into retained earnings. If that gets a little too technical, don't worry about it. But just be assured that we're paying attention to those kinds of things. Okay. So anyway, recovery occurs when the house sells, right, or when you put somebody on a payment plan, or when we foreclose. But the real power of this is it gets people to stay current on their current dues. Because that money's sitting out there right now, we don't have it, right? We can't use it. Does us no good. But if we are able to enter into a negotiated agreement with someone that's past due, not waiving their past dues, right, but putting them on a payment plan, and one of the requirements of the payment plan is they stay current on this year's dues. That helps us in this year even more than it helps us to collect the past stuff that's not paid. Yes, ma'am.
You know, when I was shopping for my house here, I looked at a lot of properties because I was kind of thinking in terms of location and, evaluating size, cost and so on. And there were a lot of homes that were in really bad shape.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering how many of and I don't know if you can actually come up with a figure, but how much of it is just people walk away from their homes and the money, the dues are not being paid for that purposes? Or is it that people just have learned from the past that they can get away with not paying it and nothing happens?
I think that's a great question. So the question is, we see a lot of homes that are dilapidated, or people have walked away from them, or is it people just not paying dues because they know they're not going to be consequences? And I think the answer in this case is a little all of the above. And that ratio changes depending on financial circumstances. Right, 2007, right? Guess what? It was a ticklish time for all HOAs because so many homes are getting foreclosed on. Everybody had problems, right? We're better now, but homes are still getting regularly foreclosed on. We actually get charged fees when homes get foreclosed on. That's part of our budget. You can actually look historically at how much we bring in on charging those fees. It's fairly steady. Okay, it's fairly steady. Okay.
A lot of investors, people who flip homes, buy the foreclosures, and do they have to
Yes.
back fees? They do?
Yeah.
As part of that deal?
Well, there are a couple variations. If a bank forecloses, okay, they can what's called perfect the note, which wipes out any imperfections on the previous, takes away previous liens. Okay? But a lot of times banks do what's called pre-foreclosure, which isn't technically a foreclosure, in which case they actually owe us the dues. The bank has to pay us the dues in that situation. And they try to do that to save money because foreclosure costs them more money. We have several that do, yeah. It's something that's fairly recent, that's changed kind of in the last handful of years, that practice. So, okay, so anyway, that makes sense, right? We want the budget to show detail so that we know what the true state of affairs is. We don't want it to show extra revenue that we don't have a good chance of collecting, right? And we want to be able to accurately account for that money we haven't collected that we're going to put over in another pot that's going to stay visible. It's not going to be commingled with everything else. That way we'll be accountable for it. Okay? In a little bit, yeah. Yeah. Okay, so the other thing, one of the other things that happens with financial statements and budgets has to do with classification and deviations. Okay? So this is where I was talking about those little flags. Remember those red flags or white flags or green flags? You want your financial statement, you want your budget and your forecast to toss those up so you can see quickly, is there a problem or not a problem? Well, if you look at this is the line from 2015, 16, 17, and 18, the same examples we've been using. If you look at the total admin expense, right, you can see there's a big variation there, right? It's not real predictable. Does that mean it's wrong? No, absolutely doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means that you can't see the trend easily. In order to see if there's a problem, which there's a problem, or probably there's a problem, you got to go in and look at the details and find out why. All right? So there are ways that you can classify or categorize your accounts and your types of transactions you have that keeps your normal operations more even. And if your normal operations are more even, those things stick out. And it's easier to say, oh, there's a trend. Right now, what's our trend for total admin expense? Anybody tell me? Are we up 2%, down 3%? How am I going to project next year? I can't from this unless I go in, like I did this time, and I go normalize. I go through all the prior year's transactions. I did this back to 2014, and I take out all those oddballs. In this particular case, I don't bring up bad memories, but we had high legal expenses and high accounting expenses. Both hit us double whammy in that year. Okay? Those are not normal. Those don't help me predict what the budget should be next year. They don't help me identify the trend. Right? So I want to take those things out of, right? Not out of our financial statement, but I don't want them sitting in there making noise, muddying up our ability to look at the financial statement and say, oh, there's a problem. Right now we see there's a problem, but to find out what it really is, you got to spend a lot of time to go and dig into it, which I'm guessing most of you guys don't really want to do. All right? I actually have kind of fun. It's kind of like a great big puzzle, so it's been a little bit fun. It's a little tiring, but it's a little fun. All right. Then we have another example, okay, where we have a relationship with YSPUC, where YLOA does admin labor for YSPUC. It makes a lot of sense. Why should we have two separate staffs doing the same thing? It's more efficient to do it by sharing the labor. Okay. But the way we account for that, right, is that we put it on the books as an expense at YSPUC. So if you look at YSPUC's financial statement, unless you look at the forecast that I do because I've reclassified that into labor, if you look at it, it looks like YSPUC's labor is only $700,000, for example. When in fact, it's higher than that because they're paying YLOA to do the labor. But it doesn't show up on the labor line. Right? It shows up in the expense line. And likewise, there's a reverse on YLOA's side. All right? Where it shows up as revenue for YLOA. So that actually increases our revenue. We're like, woohoo, we made another $150,000. Where'd that come from? Why doesn't that match up with what our, dues were? Or, it's so it also means when you go look as a homeowner, is you're more likely to look at the HOA balance sheet and financial statement than the YSPUC's. But if you go do that, you go, why in the heck do we spend so much money on admin labor? Right? I mean, what are we paying these people to do all this work? Well, the issue is not how much money we spend for that. The issue is the way the financial statement presents it. It shows up as income, right? It doesn't show up as an offset to labor. So if YSPUC, like this year, is paying YLOA $200,000 for labor to do the YSPUC administration. So that means, you look at our previous financial statements, our labor costs for admin would be $200,000 less than what shows up. But you don't know that if you don't dig into it. Right? Does that make sense? I know it's getting a little bit dry, so I'll speed this up, and we've got one last example, and then we'll talk about recommendations and what I suggest we do this year. Okay. The other thing that we do, okay, because one of the key things in accounting is you try to allocate and assign your expenses to the appropriate departments, right? You try to line up all your revenue and expenses to get a true picture of what it costs to operate something. Right? And the reason you do that is that if you want to know what the true cost is, so are you making money or losing money? That's the primary reason to do that. Okay? Well, the way HOAs are structured, right, our amenities are designed to be subsidized. They would not exist, and I know not everybody agrees with that, but that's what we bought into. I mean, that's the structure. But they wouldn't exist. You would never open a restaurant like the Heron here in this community. There simply is not, it would make no business sense. So it wouldn't make business sense to try to open a restaurant here to operate for profit. Does it make sense to allocate expenses to that division that has no control over what those expenses are. Okay? So, sometimes, yes. If it's truly a part of operating that business, and if they stopped doing it, it would go away, then that makes sense, because that's a true part of the day-to-day operations of the business. All right? But we have an example here about electric. Okay? We allocate electric among 4 different places here for the clubhouse. We put some of it in the clubhouse. We put some of it on security. We put some of it on admin, and we put some of it on the Blue Heron restaurant. Well, if you think about it, how much do you think our electric bill would change if the security department moved out? All right? It wouldn't change at all. How much do you think our electric bill would change if the admin department moved out? Not really very much, because we're heating and cooling the clubhouse all day anyway as the amenity, to have it available. And the bottom line is, it doesn't change what it costs. It just moves the numbers around into different places. Okay, which makes the expenses in those departments look actually higher than they are, because we would still have to pay it anyway. Does that make sense? The other thing that it does is it hides things, right? So if I'm going through, scanning through my security budget, right, and I'm looking at it, I'm going, all right, $1,600, $1,900. If I'm just quickly going through, I'm blowing right over those numbers. Those aren't the big ones. How much can I affect my budget by changing something there? Maybe a little bit more. Yeah, I care about it for admin. That's, $15,000 to $22,000. That's a big line item for me, but, I can't do much about it, so I don't really care, right? The admin manager can't change that. So if they're looking at their budget, what are they going to do to lower that cost? Nothing, right? It's not under their control. So that's why I recommend for these kinds of things, we don't do the allocation like this. Instead, you allocate it to the amenity so that we get that big number. I actually want to see that big number. And the reason I want to see that big number is I go, wow, $53,000 in electric. Holy smokes, maybe we should put new air conditioners on. But I'm not going to see that. If I'm looking at $22,000, it's not going to occur to me to go, because we're not going to save that much money. There's not a good return on investment. But at $53,000 a year, it's a much better return on investment, which is why it's the first thing on our Fix Our Stuff plan. But my point is you don't see it, and you don't easily see it when you look at the breakdown of our financial statements. It doesn't jump out at you. You have to search for it. So all of these things I've been talking about are about designing our financial statements and our budget in ways that make it easier to see those flags so that we can make smart management decisions about what we do. And at the end of the day, allocation doesn't change our expense. It just puts it in a different bucket. It doesn't change it. And again, I'd rather have a big number pop up so that we pay attention to the big numbers and try to do something about them. The other thing it does that's really interesting, and I'll do this, I think it's interesting. You guys might be ready to have another glass. We want to stop for another glass of wine? I think you can tell I actually like this stuff. I mean, I find it kind of fascinating. So hopefully some of that rubs off, but, if not, bear with me. We'll get to the other stuff in just a minute. But I just wanted to lay the good foundation. So one of the things that happens is it pits your departments against each other. Okay? So just as a simple example, right? Historically, until October when I changed this, if maintenance did work for the Heron, guess what? We allocated the cost of that to the Heron. Right? It's not wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just, what is the purpose of that? Well, the purpose is to say, what does it truly cost to run the Heron? But what happens when we do that is now my budget in maintenance looks better. Looks like I spent less money. It looks like I had lower labor costs. Well, do you think that's actually happening? No, I'm just moving the numbers over somewhere else. And in fact, maintenance is one of those interesting, and it makes it more difficult to track how well maintenance is doing, because we look at their budget and we say, oh, wow, maintenance is way under budget. Woohoo! No, not woohoo. Maintenance is where we need to be spending our money. Remember that HOA comparison? And we can't even get a good feel for how much money we're spending on maintenance when we look at the maintenance P&L. Okay? That's why this is important. That's why it's important to get this right and design it so that that stuff jumps out at us and we can make smart decisions. All right. Enough of that. You don't get as pretty a picture, but it's probably a little bit more interesting, okay? So, these are the recommendations I'm making for the budget this year. First of all, I want to let you guys know I have proposed to the board and they have approved changing our fiscal year. Currently, our fiscal year ends on May 31st. Okay? However, our dues year doesn't start until July 1st. Okay? So an interesting thing happens. Our budget like the one we're trying to pass on Saturday, comes in, right? And the new budget has higher revenues, because usually dues are going up a little bit, at least. Not a little more than a little bit this time, because we got to catch up, but usually it's going up, right? Guess what else happens? Our expenses go up every year. That's just the nature of life. So what do? We put that in as the budget for June. But what are the dues we're collecting? They're the dues from last year. And what were the expenses based on when we created that budget? Last year's expenses. So you get hit with a double whammy. We got less revenue actually coming in, and we have more expenses. So we start out every year behind. Every year we start out behind compared to budget. Every year. Makes it hard to keep track of where we are and where we want to go and if we're doing a good job. So this year we're going to close our year regularly on May 31st. We're going to do a 1-month budget. There'll be a drop-in budget that's based on our current budget for revenue and expense, which is what we actually will get and have the expenses we will have in June. And then we will close that year. So it'll be just a one catch-up, 1 month catch-up. We'll start our fiscal year in alignment on July 1st with the dues when they change, with the expenses changing at the same time, and we won't start out behind. So it's kind of been a tough deal for the GMs here for all these years because they're playing catch-up from the beginning. All right? And so, first of all, don't start behind. That's just overwhelmingly depressing. It's no fun. Okay? And we don't have to. Okay? Second, allocate, like we discussed, in an informative way. Okay? It may not be the way that absolutely, totally, accurately accounts for 100% the cost of operating the amenity, but that's not what we're after. Okay? We still can get it. We have to work a little harder for it, but we still can get it. But in the meantime, we keep good track of what's going on with maintenance. So, for example, instead of maintenance transferring their labor directly into expenses in the Blue Heron where I never see it, right? I mean, I do see it, but it's really hard to find. Instead, they just put a category called Blue Heron in the maintenance department, and they transfer it into there. Then I know how much we spent total in maintenance and how much we spent at each of the amenities. And the other thing that happens about maintenance, a lot of maintenance isn't decided by the managers of the departments, right? I'm working with Corey and looking at what's going on with the park and making the priority decisions around all of the amenities. So then they're going to get ticked off at me because I say, hey, we're going to go fix this at the golf course, or we're going to go fix this in the Heron, and I blow up their budget. And they look bad. But it was the right thing to do. So hopefully, I know I'm kind of beating a dead horse on this one, but don't anybody report me for that. But hopefully that makes sense, and you understand the reasoning why, trying to address that and change that. Okay, the next thing, which is related to number 1, is that we need to fund our current year's obligations with our current year dues, okay, and not revenue from the next fiscal year, okay? So what happens? Particularly happens with the way our fiscal year was set up, okay, is we start getting dues payments for next year, which aren't due until the end of July. I didn't say they're due at the beginning of July. No, they're due at the end of July, or they're late at the end of July. They're due July 1st, they're late July 31st. But once we start sending out the statements, we'll have people pay them in May, we'll have people pay them in June. And guess what? That money's coming in the door. And it's available. And if you need that money to pay your bills, what are you going to do? You're going to use that money. But that's what's going to happen when we get to the end of the year. I don't have that money. I can't, we can't fix the tennis courts. We can't do those things put on our budget that we wanted to do because we're constantly running behind. All right? And it's not the fault of the, part of it's just the system, okay? But it really makes a big difference, and it's not something that we can fix immediately. Okay? As an example, we fully funded OSS last year. All right? I know that has been a hot point for a number of people. Layton's right on top of that. We fully funded it. It's called Operation Self-Sufficiency, which I am planning in the next fiscal year to change to PRP, for Pipeline Replacement Project. All right. So there was some issues early on where people weren't, where it didn't get fully funded the first year that it started, and that created some issues, right? So it's been a super hot point to fully fund that. Layton made sure that happened. Okay? However, because we're playing this catch-up game, and he was playing it even worse than I am, what did we do? We had to fund it with next year's dues. So we funded it in June, fully funded, but guess what? Now we get to the end of this year, it's real tight again. All right? So we got to make sure that we get the money in the right places and the right years, and we operate with the cash that's in that place. Or if not, make it super abundantly clear why and what we're going to do about it. Okay? So one of the things that we did, I talked to the board. I think we passed this in the last board meeting. It was the last one or one before. It might have been the one before. So there's also been a political ruckus about, the association has to borrow money from YSPUC. And they get an advance payment, and that's because they run out of money and they didn't manage their budget right. And well, hopefully you can see why we run out of money. But the second point is, we're not borrowing money from YSPUC. YSPUC pays us to do their administrative work. That makes sense for both of us. It's not a gift, it's not a charity, it's what makes the most economic sense for both entities. So what it really is it's a prepayment. Just like half the people in the park pay their dues. You could pay your dues every month if you wanted to, or sometimes it's easier, just pay it all at once and be done with it. And you don't have to do those bank transactions every month. So I asked the board, because we usually get to this point of the year and we're kind of running out of cash and we're scrambling, and we said, well, we got to get that advance payment. Which then everybody thinks, well, we mismanaged everything. Not true. It just is the nature of the cycle we've been in. So I asked the board to actually make it the policy that YSPUC pays its admin fee to YLOA in January every year. Just like we can pay our dues for the whole year in July. Just like we can prepay insurance. The HOA, we prepay things, right? We don't pay everything every month. A lot of times we pay in advance. And it makes sense because cash flow is tighter for YLOA than it is for YSPUC, because YSPUC has more cash reserves than we do. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah. YSPUC is the water utility company, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of YLOA. So YLOA is the homeowners association, and it owns the water company. And the water company, it's actually real handy, guys, to have companies that have different fiscal years, because you actually get to, you get to work your budgets. You can manage your businesses better that way, actually. But so the board passed that recommendation. So going forward, I don't want anybody to ever say, we're getting a loan from YSPUC. We are not getting a loan. We're just having them pay in advance. Because they've got the money and we're tight because of this cycle that we've been in, and it helps us get through that process. Okay? All right. Here's another thing that we really have to focus on. Building operational reserves to ensure adequate cash flow. All of those things that we've been talking about We get down to the end of the year, we spend so much time making sure that we're going to have enough money in the bank to make it through the end of the year. I mean, I don't know if any of you guys have been there personally. I've had a time in my life where, I balanced to the penny or the dollar or cashed in savings bonds early, back when I was in college because I wanted to eat. Not fun, actually not smart. I would have made a lot more money if I didn't run out, right? This creates a lot of headache and a lot of stress and a lot of extra work for YLOA admin team because we have to constantly watch and monitor. It's stressful, and there's no reason for it. Just that we've been stuck in this cycle. We need to make it a priority to get out of this cycle. We should always have for an institution our size, which is 5 million plus in operating revenues, at least 5% of that, at least $250,000 in the bank all the time. Because your payments go up and down, right? And even if you have the money and you have the money coming in, you may draw your bank account balance down to $100,000. You may draw it down to $50,000. Well, it's no big deal because in 3 days you got $400,000 coming back in. But if you don't have that money to draw down, you have to wait. You have to manage it, right? You have to talk to the vendor so that all the money flows without there being an interruption. Because if there's an interruption, then you pay late fees and then everything comes crashing down. So it is much better for us, much easier, much less stressful, much less expensive for us to make sure we've got funds in our operating accounts. It's not extra. That's just the money you need to operate. As an example, right now, actually I'll hit that one. I'll hit that one in a minute. Right now we actually have more in OSS reserves than we do in operational reserves right now. As of the end of January, we had $400,000 in the OSS fund. Okay, because we've been fully funding it. And that's fine. We need operating capital in OSS for it to operate. That's the operating capital definition. But we need it there because we have big expenses that come up, right? So you pay pipe. Again, they're paying things in advance. We just placed an order for $75,000 worth of pipe because we're going to install over the next year. Well, we couldn't do that if we didn't have the money there, right? However, at this time, we have more money in that account, which is only dedicated to OSS, than we do in the operating accounts for the rest of the association. Okay? That's a challenge. Yes, sir. Okay, OSS are dedicated funds specifically for OSS/PRP, for the pipeline replacement project. They are restricted. They can only be used to pay for that. Okay? So, where operational reserves are our general funds that we can use for just running our regular operations. Okay? So, I know historically we come to the budget meeting, we don't usually have this meeting beforehand, but we come to the budget meeting on Saturday and we look at a list of all the CapEx projects that we want to get done. We argue about which ones are worth it and which ones are not worth it, and is it value to the community, and should we pay for this or pay for that, and which ones of those should we pick, and we all get in this uproar over it, right? My recommendation right now is that I'm not recommending any specific CapEx projects, okay? We've got these other things that we need to take care of. Instead of spending money on CapEx, we need to get our operational footing. All right? So I recommend, yes, sir.
You say no new projects other than what we currently have?
Not quite. Funding out of CapEx, which is operational dollars. We have a whole other pool of money called reserves, which are designed for maintenance and replacement of the existing amenities. And we'll talk about that in just a second. Yes, ma'am.
So, the OSS can't be touched. Is that what you're saying?
The OSS is restricted, has restricted funds. So the board can elect to fund or not fund that at any level this year. Okay? But we can't touch the money that's in there right now. I can't touch that money that's in there right now.
If you don't continue funding it,
Right.
where are we going next?
Yeah, it wouldn't make any sense to not continue funding it. So, yeah.
Back where we started.
No, and that's a project I've been working real closely with Greg, who's our manager on the, I'm going to start calling it PRP, on our PRP project. We've really started hitting recently some good efficiencies by getting them extra tools, by getting them. Steve's heavily involved in that. He'll be happy to talk to you after this meeting. But we really are getting. They really are starting to hit their stride, and their morale's better. They're faster.
What's going to happen is, okay, we have that, so we have to continue keeping those reserves going, so like
Yes.
for next year.
Yes.
funding them.
Yes.
Otherwise, we can't do any more of the roads, and everybody's upset about that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, trust me. I hear about the roads. I get you. I'm not recommending any specific CapEx projects. Okay. We get disappointed all the time because we want to do this thing, and then because of this cycle I explained, we end up getting to the end of the year and we don't have the money to do it. And they're like, "What did we vote to do that for? What do we have this big old argument about? We should do this or that, or because it didn't get done." Well, it didn't get done for a good reason. We didn't have the money, but that kind of sucks, right? I mean, it really does. But instead of recommending specific ones, I'm recommending that we keep funds liquid, right, for addressing any surprises that may arise and for handling smaller maintenance projects that we will pick on a case-by-case basis as desirable as we go through the year and figure out what fits with the maintenance team, if they have extra time, what they're working on, a whole other host of factors, which we don't know yet, right? Also, just to make you aware, we still have some old stuff sitting out there. We had a collection company in the past that we used that didn't actually collect any money for us, but they still have some invoices for us. Their invoices are dated from 2 years ago. They haven't pushed us to pay them. We're not going to jump up and volunteer, but we ought to be aware that this stuff sits out there, and we have some cleanup stuff that we need to be prepared for. All right. Okay, that doesn't mean do nothing, though. All right? Because larger projects, this year, I'm recommending we fund from the reserves as part of the Fix Our Stuff plan. Okay? And we're going to talk about that in a little, just in a slight bit, but we're still going to do stuff. In fact, we're going to do a lot of stuff. But we're not going to do those projects that we're not sure we have guaranteed funding for. The difference with the Fix Our Stuff plan is it is being funded out of money we already have in the bank today to pay 100% for all the things on that list in the next year. What I'm asking the board for in this budget is put the money in there so we can do it again next year. But we don't have to wait. We can start. And in fact, if we pass the budget, I will ask the board to authorize us to get going right away. There's no reason on reserve funds that we would have to wait till the fiscal year started. We could get started. We've already got quotes on replacing the roof. We got quotes on fixing the air conditioners. We're getting all the numbers. The one for the fixing the parking lot for ADA parking came back in way too high, so we're not using that guy. But we're looking at that, and we're ready to go on that. Okay, so we're still doing stuff. We're just doing it a different way. Okay, we're going to come across some items, like updating the lights in the parking lot, that just make sense based on ROI. All right, it's just a matter of getting time and attention. In the clubhouse this year, in the Heron, upstairs, over at the new water building, we replaced all our fluorescent lights with LED lights. Well, did we have that on the budget? No, but they cost $100 and they pay for themselves in 12 months. So it kind of was a no-brainer, right? And there will be things like that happen that have really quick payback, right? Like the lights. We spent a lot of money on those lights out there. And doesn't mean we can get to it right away, but it's the kind of thing that let's see where we get and see how we're doing, and then let's tackle those ones that make sense. Also, there is no formal budget for collections. We have not had one. We don't have one. We don't know exactly what it's going to cost in terms of labor, in terms of postage, in terms of how many times you got to send letters. You got to go manually deliver some of them, okay? So we have to leave some dollars available to fund that activity, which is critical. But I don't have a specific budget number for you this year because can't tell you, we got 50 of them that we're going to do and 47 letters, and we got to send them 3.2 letters. When we get those kind of numbers, we'll have a specific budget for it. But right now we don't. Right now we know we need to do it, so we need to keep funds available to prioritize that. Yes, ma'am. Volunteering gets a little, I appreciate that. It gets a little tricky with the collection process because collections is very, very regulated and specific. It's very legalistic. If you don't follow the process exactly right, you got to start all over. Okay? And there is privileged and private information that we're not at liberty to share outside of the association. But there's lots of other things we can get you to volunteer for. Talk to Becky. Talk to Becky when we're done. Right? Okay. There's another thing that I would like to recommend as it relates to collections. All right? And that is, in a nonprofit, it's actually kind of hard to line up good financial incentives to reward behavior. In a for-profit company, it's easy. You make more money, you give the people that work there more money. Easy. Were they successful or not successful? How much money did you make? Well, I don't know the metric to measure how good a job we're doing. How happy are people? Well, it depends on what day and what road they drove over, right? However, this is one that's very clearly advantageous for both the admin team and for the association. If we're not collecting that money anyway, we don't have it. All right? And if what we do is we go to the admin team and we say, hey guys, guess what? We got this big new project for you. You get to do all these other things and make these phone calls and talk to these angry homeowners. Aren't you so excited there's more work? No, they're not really excited about it. I'm excited about it because it's going to get us our operational reserves. They're not very excited about it. So if we can offer a small incentive as part of collecting those dollars that we don't have anyway, it totally changes the attitude that they have about doing it. And guess what? Instead of it being the last thing they want to do, it becomes one of the first things they want to do. So that's another piece of smart spending. Pick where you're going to target your dollars to try to motivate the appropriate behavior that you want. Okay? Okay. There are a couple other reserve projects that we do need to fund this year outside of the Fix Our Stuff pool cover. We had to get a new pool cover. That one's falling apart. It's between $7,000 and $10,000 typically. However, I made the acquaintance of Eddie Reed a couple of weeks ago, who is like pool man extraordinaire. He ran the Clovis Unified School System's pools, all of them. He was in charge of the whole thing, and he still manages pools for municipalities. So he actually will get us chemicals at cost. He'll give us advice, and he's expert. In fact, I'm going to toot his horn because he's volunteered and at his own cost bought a new scoreboard. He also sells signs. He bought a new scoreboard for Little League for our rec center. Okay, and he's installing it. And he's not even here tonight. What's that? Yes, he will. Yes, he will. That's a couple years away, Doug, but yes. No, he is literally expert. He is expert. Actually, it was super fun to talk to him because I actually swam competitively up through high school and college in some of the same pools that he maintained. So it was I hadn't thought about that stuff in years. It was a fun conversation. He's a resident. Yeah, he lives up here. He moved up here about 3 years ago. Okay. All right. So there are other projects that we might want to do that are reserve level projects. But we got so much stuff going on right now, it's silly for me to make another list and another priority list. So we'll address those. We can always address those with the board on a go-forward basis as our needs come up. If it makes sense, if we can make a good case for it, pretty much the board will approve that or we'll vote a new board in next time. So no, it's got to make sense, right? And that's the board is a check on me, and it's appropriate, right? So. Okay. And then one last piece. I do recommend one other large project that we undertake this year, that is fund the repainting of the roads with funds from the new roads reserve that I have proposed establishing as part of the FOS plan. Okay? It's something that's a danger issue. It's a safety issue. It really needs to be done. Our equipment is not well suited to it. It keeps breaking down. It takes us longer. It actually ends up, if you pencil it out, you got to pay $15,000 for paint. You got to take a bunch of time for labor. You got to maintain the machine. It pencils out that it pencils out that it's a better deal and gets done all at once with another crew that comes in and does it. It should last longer as well. So I do recommend in proposing to the board that we do that with the dedicated roads reserve fund I'm proposing setting up this year. Okay. Anybody want a glass of wine? Now's a really good time. Promise. No, that was the hard part. I don't want. The other part was kind of fun. This part's kind of tough. All right. Okay. So you remember those numbers we started looking at the beginning with the interest? Remember that shortfall that it showed? We put it on our books as revenue, but we don't really get it. Okay. Well, I didn't know that at the beginning of the year. Okay. I figured it out pretty quick, but it does leave a hole in our budget, and it leaves a hole because we can't budget like that next year. Okay, the budget I'm presenting next year is saying, hey, we make $10,000 on interest and $10,000 on late fees. That's pretty good, but we can't count on any more than that in our operating business. But it leaves a big chunk of revenue not covered, which we have depended on and we have counted on as we prepared our budgets, how we have things set up, and and it's tight. So I've been sharpening the pencil. I know that's an old phrase. I don't like those too much, but I have been sharpening the pencil. Well, it's really a pen and wearing out my fingers on the keyboard. Along with smart spending, which we talked about last time, we really need to look, what can we do creatively to close that gap that we've been depending on all these years to help us get going. So first recommendation is that I propose we change the aerobic inspection fee from $3 per month to $4 per month. Okay? It's $1 a month. Think about it honestly, too. You think we really can afford to go inspect your aerobic system every month for $3? You just can't tell us, right? Yeah. Well, there you go, right? That's what I say. And you look at the financial statement, and you're like, woohoo, way aerobics. No. It doesn't have all of the appropriate accoutrements allocated in there. So, and at any rate, that would generate, as little as that is, just $1 a month, it generates about $30,000 to make up some of that interest piece. The next thing I suggest is that we change the payment processing fee from $7 per payment to $8 per payment. Okay, that actually generates about $10,000 for us. Now, let me tell you why that payment processing fee is there, because it's a legitimate question. All right? The reason we have a payment processing fee is we don't have to, by the way, we don't have to let people make payments through the year. That actually you could require dues to be paid all at once, and a lot of associations do that. However, it does cost us more money to do that. Not only do we not get the funds in hand, it costs us just as much to process a check for $100 as it does for $1,000. So if you pay us every month, which is a convenience, right, to make it easier, it's good. I like it. In fact, we do that. Just because that's what we do to set up. It's easier just to budget that way and have it automatically come out every month. But it does cost more to do it that way. That's why there is a payment processing fee. And remember all this labor stuff we're talking about, minimum wage and all wage pressure, the cost of doing it are going up too. So I think it's appropriate to make a small adjustment there. There's another piece right now where we're helping credit card companies make money. We currently accept credit cards, and I'm not proposing we change that. However, when somebody pays us with a credit card, it costs us somewhere between 2.2 and about 3.6%, depending on what the card is. But we don't presently charge any extra for that. So if you make payments to us every month, it costs us more, and we pass that on. I think that's a fair deal. We don't do that with credit cards. And that actually costs us about $20,000 a year. And it doesn't really transaction is $40 to $45. All right, I talked so much I ran out of battery. Oh, man. It's definitely good we're bringing it to an end. Yeah.
Was whatever the cash cost is, that's what you charge on Visa card. You can't mark it up.
No, we can't mark it up, but we can charge a transaction fee. Right? It's not marking up the price. It's charging a transaction fee or convenience fee, just like we do with the other payments. So, yep. Yes. Yes. $1 a month. Yes. Yes. Because let me run the numbers pretty quick. It's about $4. It's roughly $5 more per month to do that, mostly because of the credit card fee. Roughly $60 a year. So, but we can take a debit card, right? A debit card, which works just like a credit card. Again, that's an ACH transaction. Only costs 25 cents for us to take that. Right. So we're not trying to take away the convenience, right? It really does make a difference in the costs. Yeah, if it's a debit card Visa, you bet it's a debit card. That's called an EBT. Yeah. Yes, sir. You really asking that question in this room? Have I not been talking all night long about what we got to do to fix this stuff? No. What? We could do it that way. Instead, we do it the other way. We give you a $96 a year discount for paying up front. So, all right. So, and guys, this has really been an exercise in I've been digging into the financials, trying to understand them as deeply as I can, sharpening the pencil, look for ways where we can literally shave dollars and cents, because sooner we do that, the better we're going to be and the faster we're going to get ourselves on the right track. All right, we are wrapping up. You guys have been super patient. I really appreciate it. I hope this has been educational and beneficial. I've included in here, for those that were not at the first town hall or second town hall and would just like a refresher, that's the comparison that we did to the other HOAs. Okay, that's one sheet. The entire presentation is available on our website, as is a video archive of it. So if you want to watch it, you're not bored to death of hearing me talk yet, go home and have some popcorn and have fun. The reserve comparison. That's the second key point from the first presentation. You see us on the left. This is not a case of smaller being better. Okay? But that paints it in pictures for you of what our situation is. Okay? And it is why it's why I am recommending that we get off to an aggressive kickstart, because if we don't do it, if we don't kickstart it so that we've got enough to actually get stuff done, we're going to be waiting 2 or 3 years to get enough money to actually even tackle this stuff in any size or substance. But after we do this one, with one caveat of waiting for the new reserve study to come out, because there may be things on there I don't know about, but I do not expect future years' dues increases, as long as I'm here, to ever have to do that again, unless there's some major emergency that nobody predicted. All right? But you should anticipate a smallish increase every year, so we keep pace. Okay? Now, I gave an example last time about what happened with $2. I see some new faces here tonight. If we would have paid $2 more per month, $2 more per month every year for the last 20 years, okay? Which is painless, right? It was $2 a month. $25 a year, that's all. Just $25 more each year. Our budget today would be $1 million higher than it is. And we would have raised $11 million in additional reserve funds that would have taken care of all the stuff that was here. Okay? So we've got the double challenge. Well, it's a triple challenge for us because we got to make up for what we didn't do for that 20 years. And again, no pointing fingers. It's just where we are. Secondly, we've got to deal with the wage increase, which is a tremendously challenging issue of 50% wage increase for minimum wage. When you have a large number of lower wage earning employees, it hits us real hard because that's 50% of our revenue goes to pay wages. That's the second strike, which we'll overcome. And the third one is we still have to think to the future. We don't want to end up in this spot again. So we got to handle all three of those things, and we're going to navigate through it. And I think we've got a good plan and a good start on it. Okay, I included for those that weren't here, just as a refresher, the Fix Our Stuff plan, so you know what we're talking about. Okay, it talks about why we prioritize, what we prioritize, why we picked the things that are on the list in the order that we picked them. It's a recommendation that we make a 5-year plan for repairing and updating our major amenities, starting with the clubhouse, next year the cafe, then the pool, the equestrian and rec center, miscellaneous and clubhouse deck, and then at that time, while we're simultaneously setting aside money for roads, through a roads reserve, we'll start road paving. Okay? Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Yeah. I love it. I love it. Yeah. 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 I love that idea. I'd have to look at what like the administrative costs are and what the return on that would be, but yeah, maybe. Yeah. 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 Now commercial. Yeah. Yeah. The comment is that there are a lot of commercial trucks that come through here. All right, commercial trucks. There are commercial trucks that come through that are overweight, and that is a violation. I don't know this 100% for certain. I actually want to get a legal opinion on this. Make sure I understand our bylaws correctly. But I believe that we actually have the ability to enforce our roads with our security department. Okay? I don't know that for 100% certain. The language is not explicitly clear to me. However, also be aware we are getting 2 more security vehicles. We had one that was damaged in a crash. We figured out how to finance that through our budget and get it taken care of. So we will have, adequate security vehicles back on patrol here fairly soon. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. 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 This. Yeah. Yeah. All right. This one is an issue that I'm actually going to push this one on Tom because he's not here. But Tom is actually interested in this. Tom is a board member that's the chair of the ECC. Okay, and he actually has an interest in this particular topic. I don't have any more comments to make on that right now. It's a huge discussion of its own right, but I hear what you guys are saying. It is an issue, and we need to consider it. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. Well, I probably shouldn't say this because I really don't want to point any fingers backwards. But we had gates at one point. We also had an opportunity at one time, and again, just information that to get that road repaved when they did the park and ride at the high school. So, right. So, so this board wouldn't do that though. Yeah. Anyway, it's just that's what happens, guys. That's what happens when we got so many people and so many different ideas. So these things you're passionate about, come to the board meetings, come to the town halls, run for the board. We have new board elections coming up. I mean, if you're passionate about this stuff, come get your opinion heard. I mean, that's, some people will agree with you, some people will disagree, but let's have the conversation. I got one in the back row over there first. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Layton, you want to answer that one, or you want me to handle it? All right. The question is, why do we not have gates? All right. We actually could put gates in if we wanted to. We have reserved the right as private roads. That's the blue signs you see as you're coming in. We have made sure that even though we've allowed public passage, that those roads are still reserved and we can take them private anytime if we want to. The reason they are not is that when they're gates, you don't get the sheriff's department coming in, which some of you might like, but you don't get them coming in. You don't get fire department issues are challenging, and the bus. The buses don't come because they don't want to mess with having to come through private gates. So, yeah, or set passes or whatever. So, yes, ma'am. Yes. I don't know if we can get a fee from that one, but that one is on my desk. I had not received notice, nor had anybody on our management team that I talked to receive notice of where they are working currently. We did receive notice of a small section they want to do in the future, but I do have the name of the person I need to talk to that manages their right-of-way, and I promise you we will be having a conversation once we get through this budget process. I had another one in the back first. All right. So that's something we'd take volunteers for. Okay, Becky said Tom Wheeler, who's our local assembly. Yeah, he's having a town hall soon. All right, so 5-year plan, the one other component of that we wanted to address with this year's budget was to increase our maintenance budget to extend the life of our existing infrastructure so that it lasts long enough for us to fix it. Okay? I have here, we're not going to go through it in detail. We did this last time. You can watch the video, but just for reference, that's the list of the priorities that we put on for fixing at the clubhouse based on return on investment, minimizing risk, and those were the top priorities, and just fixing the ADA stuff largely in that too. The next page is how we fund that. Okay, this is how I've broken down the proposal in the budget that I'm presenting on Saturday, or that we'll be talking about on Saturday. There's a slight change with the maintenance. I couldn't get quite that much into maintenance right now because I need a little bit more for contingency to make the thing balance out. But Jen is doing her final review of the numbers I provided. We're going to have a nice little argument about it tomorrow morning. And then hopefully that will be, hopefully we'll be able to pass that on to the board soon, and then to the community at large when we have the meeting on Saturday. So, okay, so that's what I got. Now you guys have been super patient. I've been chattering, a long time. I'm, ready to go get some of that wine I was talking to you guys about. But thank you so much for being here and listening to this and going through it. I hope it was educational.